Hello, my name is Sarah Dunne, and this evening I'm giving a presentation on 3D printed instruments. This is an image of my granny. In 2011, I visited her in hospital where she just had hip replacement surgery. I, at the time, naively relayed a book that I'd been reading, thinking that it would make her feel better. It's called Rebuilt, How Becoming Part Computer Made Me More Human. The author relays a story, a true story, where he lost hearing during a flight and regained it through cochlear implant surgery. Similar to Nicholas Negroponte, the quote here, like air and drinking water, being digital will be noticed not only by its absence, not by its presence. Or we could look at Cascone, who also talks in a similar way, talking about post-digital technologies, how it's sort of absorbed and becomes naturalized within our world. Granny was not pleased by this, and quite rightly so, said that she wouldn't be borrowing that book. Great. Similar to the chip of Theseus, where it questions the point at which an original becomes a replica, Granny wasn't enthused by the idea of her becoming part machine-like and less of Granny, so I understood. That did bring up something, because that is a while away. In 2011, I became just increasingly more interested in copying things and replacing things and in integrating things within my practice. I already had a PhD in fine art, and I was interested in developing that a little bit further. In my art teaching practice, I got really interested or more interested in casting and mold making and repetition and repeated use of materials in different ways. So we can see an image of that, which I've clicked a little bit too far. No, I'll move on. We can see here from the images that they're made using mold making techniques, and this is an older iteration for it. I was also interested in making neon signs, and the idea of making something in repetition seemed really, really interesting to me. In music, I've been interested in comparative sound studies, so I'll look at that in a moment. We have an audio here, which will be playing. Okay, I'll move on. I became interested in spaces created for sound. Here we can see that there is the Musica di Violino in Italy. This is created specifically for sound, Stradivarius instrument sounds for that. There's also sonic sampling. Native instruments have created MIDI files, so you can sample the instrument and create a 3D printed instrument, potentially based on those sounds. This was a fantastic project that was created in 2017, and they asked for everybody in Cremona, Italy, to remain quite silent during this time. So there's lots of stories of cafes trying to be as quiet as possible while they sample the instruments. There's also lots and lots of historical evidence that looks at wood and varnish and craftsmanship and design and dimensions, as well as researcher bias within instrument making. So I became, again, quite interested in that. We could say, why even think about replicating instruments when they're already there? There is fragility issues and playability issues. A lot of the instruments degrade over time. Stradivari himself, who was the person who interested me, had over 1,000 instruments made in his time. However, only 500 or so remain today. So I became interested in how I could conserve that. I'd also noticed a gap in the research. So we have cheaper instruments today, largely so, and within that comes steam maintenance issues. So I was interested in addressing that gap. How could I create something that was relatively inexpensive to buy that could actually move beyond these problems? There was also a point of tension. So I mentioned the Stradivari instrument, the point of tension being a gap in the research. In 2012, Claudia Fritz created a double-blind test for Stradivarius instruments, and rather than saying the Stradivari instruments were amazing, it was quite the opposite. The majority actually said these new instruments sounded better. So they got to wear these cool glasses, obviously making sure that they didn't see the instruments that they were playing, so they were pure audio based for that. There was outrage at the time in the music world. They demanded that it had to be a fluke, it had to be an outrage, and they should test again. They did test again, and they got very similar results for it. So it did prove that there's probably two camps to be thinking about. That there's a sustained belief in the sonic qualities of older instruments from some, but maybe that our sonic preferences have changed. So maybe questioning, should we be replicating these instruments? Have they gone beyond their time frame? I had a few questions myself. I formalised within a doctorate in education, music education in Trinity in 2017. And within those, I explored 3 specific questions around technical specifications, if I was to make 3D printed instruments, the perceptions of users, whether it be teachers, musicians, or maybe students, I suppose, student musicians, and perhaps any educational benefits within that. There was also my own positionality. I surely was techno-positivistic within my attitude. However, I was aware that there are limitations within it. Here's an ex-post. Everyone's talking about 3D printers, how they're the future, but we need to slow down. I don't think we really nailed 2D printers yet. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. So anybody who's been at the printer first thing in the morning, who's trying to print for school, will, perhaps empathise with that. I was also aware that there were already iterations of 3D printed musical instruments. This is Plastic Fantastic. It's the Pitts River Museum, where they have looked at it as a kind of a conservation endeavour, where they have a lot of requests from people to take out instruments, to play instruments that are too old, perhaps, to play. So they're using 3D printing to emulate them. We should hopefully hear an audio of that in a moment. Or maybe we won't. Okay. This is Chris Evans playing the instrument. There are lovely visual, aesthetic qualities to this. However, the tonality is somewhat missing from it. I have my own methodology, and I'm hoping the sound might work for this next component. So for my methodology, I was looking for an Irish context. I am an Irish person. I have gone to Italy, of course, but where would I fit within that? What right have I to look at such instruments and to find some sort of context within that? I had looked at the Vandeleur bequest, which is a bequest that was given to the Academy, the Royal Leisure Academy. Briefly, it stayed within its collection, but then it was sold off to buy next door, so we can have an idea of how much the instrument actually cost at that time. And I was interested in trying to locate that, to find that, bringing the kind of the team back together, bringing it back to Ireland in some way, in a digital form at least, for that. So I looked at the different areas that it had ownership and dragged it down. From within that, I took some 3D scans, did some modelling, did some sound and acoustic tests from there, looking at the sonic dimensions of it, and hopefully we can see different variations of the modelling for that. So it took lots and lots of time just to look at the interior cavity. There was plenty of measurements from the outside, however there was somewhat limited 3D modelling of that. So I took time to do that, and I'll press on. So we can see the different isolations there. The violin, the original violin comes in many different parts, some say up to 90 parts if you are counting every component of it. There, as I mentioned before, there's lots of seam and maintenance issues that occur due to it degrading. I was interested in modelling that and actually eliminating some of those issues. The original one, which you probably saw on the right that I printed, I thought it was fantastic until it was played, and then I realised the limitations of how far I had gone and how much more that I needed to actually do in order to make something that was viable, something that was useful, and something that people would want to play, that could compete in the market of something that was already oversaturated, albeit made in a fairly traditional manner for that. I consulted with instrument makers, with orchestral professionals, with some teachers and with some students, and we have a 3D virtual model of the violin chamber, which we moved into. So I ended up making it in 2 parts. Although it looks like it has seams, it doesn't actually. It's just, so it fits, it's more invisible, I suppose, within the orchestra. It integrates with things that are already there. So here we can see discrepancies between A and B. Our A is the traditionally made instrument, and the B is the 3D printed violin. The different waveforms showing that it's kind of a wider spectrum for the 3D printed one, but it still has viability, or it's certainly better than the first iteration of that. Then I asked some students and a teacher here. That's Yo-Yo and Johnny. And Miss Curtin. Lovely. So I suppose concluding that in relation to the questions that I'd asked briefly, with regard to technical specifications and material properties, there's lots and lots of factors, mostly kind of structural integrity and the acoustic properties are things that I focused on, feedback that I received back. With regard to musician perceptions and values, there were a lot of generational values that were held by teachers and therefore brought on by students. So the idea of breaking that cycle wasn't necessarily as easy as having something new and seeing if it would take off. So there were teacher perceptions and values, so the pedagogical value, the cost. So the one that was just being played here has kind of cost about €50 to make using a carbon fibre 3D printed CAD printer. And for student perceptions and values, I suppose trying to be the same, as in not having things that are too different also within that. There's also some educational implications of 3D printed instruments, how they might fit into STEAM, how they might fit that access and affordability gap that is making access to musical instruments somewhat more challenging. The idea of customizing the instrument. So for me, I was trying to make it an invisible instrument, i.e. something that could be integrated with the orchestra and not feel different from that, but that could be customized. and also to involve some collaborative learning and entrepreneurship from that. Okay, great. Thank you for your time.